At 2:11 a.m. on July 23, 1945, the South China Sea was a black, endless void, broken only by the faint glow of phosphorescent waves and the distant, muffled thunder of war. In the cockpit of a Northrop P-61 Black Widow, Captain Ray Night Stalker, Johnson wiped sweat from his brow, the cool night air doing little to calm the tension that gripped every muscle. The cockpit was cramped and humming with the low, electric buzz of the radar set, its green screen flickering with ghostly echoes. Outside, the world was invisible, no moon, no stars, just the darkness and the knowledge that somewhere out there, Japanese bombers were hunting for the American fleet. Johnson's hands hovered over the controls, every sense straining for the first sign of danger. His radar operator, Lieutenant Sam Sparky Lee, hunched over the glowing scope, eyes darting as he adjusted the dials. Suddenly, Lee's voice cut through the silence, tight with urgency. Contact multiple bogies. Bearing 110. Range 12 miles. Closing fast. Johnson's heart hammered. He knew what that meant. A formation of Japanese bombers, confident in the cover of night, making a run for the ships below. The P-61's twin engines growled as Johnson banked hard, the Black Widow slicing through the darkness. He was alone. No wingmen, no backup. Just the cold comfort of his four 20mm cannons and 4.50 caliber machine guns. The odds were staggering. One night fighter against 6 enemy bombers, each one capable of turning the sea into a graveyard. But Johnson had something the Japanese didn't expect: radar, surprise, and a relentless will to hunt. As the distance closed, the tension in the cockpit was electric. Every second mattered. Every blip on the screen was a potential killer. Johnson's mind raced through the possibilities. Attack from below. Strike from behind. Use the darkness as a shield. The stakes were life and death, not just for him and Lee, but for the hundreds of sailors sleeping on the ships below. What happened next would leave both friend and foe speechless. In the next 60 minutes, the Japanese would learn that the night no longer belonged to them, and that one P-61, flown by a man they'd never seen coming, could make 6 bombers disappear without a trace. If you think you know how this story ends, think again. The hunt was just beginning. To understand the stakes of that night over the South China Sea, you have to step back into the final, fevered months of the Pacific War. By July 1945, Japan's empire was crumbling, but its airmen were as dangerous as ever. The Allies had pushed across the Pacific, island by island, but every mile gained was paid for in blood. The Japanese, desperate to slow the American advance, turned to night bombing raids, sending waves of Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers and other aircraft to strike at Allied fleets and supply convoys under cover of darkness. Night was the enemy's ally. The vastness of the Pacific, the unpredictable weather, and the blacked-out ships made it nearly impossible to spot incoming bombers until it was too late. Anti-aircraft gunners fired blindly into the night, hoping to hit something they couldn't see. The psychological toll was immense. Every sailor and pilot knew that a single bomb dropped unseen could turn a calm sea into a burning graveyard. The Japanese crews, for their part, relied on discipline, formation flying, and the hope that the darkness would shield them from retribution. But in 1944, the Allies introduced a weapon that would change the rules of the night: the Northrop P-61 Black Widow. It was the first American aircraft designed from the ground up as a night fighter, a twin-engine, twin-boom monster bristling with firepower. The P-61 was a marvel of wartime engineering. Its 4 20mm Hispano cannons and 4.50 caliber Browning machine guns could unleash a storm of lead. But its true secret weapon was the SCR-720 radar, mounted in the nose, a revolutionary system that could detect enemy aircraft in total darkness through cloud, fog, or rain. The Black Widow was fast, rugged, and deadly. Its crew of 2, a pilot and a radar operator, worked in tandem, hunting enemy bombers by the faint echoes on the radar screen. The pilot flew blind, trusting the operator's voice to guide him into firing position. It was a new kind of warfare, one that demanded nerves of steel, technical skill, and absolute trust between crew members. The South China Sea was a critical battleground. Allied fleets, massing for final push toward Japan, were vulnerable at anchor or on the move. Every night, Japanese bombers probed the defenses, looking for a gap, a moment of weakness. The P-61s were sent to close those gaps, to hunt the hunters, and to prove that the night no longer belonged to the enemy. But night fighting was a brutal, unforgiving business. The darkness hid not just the enemy, but the dangers of navigation, weather, and fatigue. Radar was still a new science, prone to glitches and ghost signals. The Black Widow's firepower was unmatched, but a single mistake, a missed call, a wrong turn, could send the hunter crashing into the sea. For Captain Ray Johnson and his radar operator, every mission was a test of skill, courage, and trust. The odds were long, the risks enormous, but the stakes could not have been higher. In the darkness above the South China Sea, the fate of ships, men, and the course of the war itself could turn on a single hour and on the actions of one crew, fly a machine that was as much myth as metal. Ray Johnson's story began far from the war-torn skies of the Pacific, in the rolling fields and dense forests of rural Minnesota. As a boy, he learned to hunt deer at dawn, tracking their movements through mist, his breath clouding in the cold air. His father, a quiet man with callous hands, taught him to fix tractors and mend fences, to respect the land and the tools that tamed it. By the time Ray was 16, he could hit a running rabbit at 50 yards and rebuild an engine from a box of parts. The farm gave him patience. The hunt gave him focus. And the long winters gave him a stubborn streak that would serve him well in the cockpit. When war came, Ray enlisted with a sense of duty and a hunger for something more. Flight school was a blur of early mornings, endless checklists, and a constant roar of engines. He gravitated toward the new, untested world of night fighting, a place where technology and instinct collided in the darkness. The P-61 Black Widow was unlike anything he'd ever flown. Heavy, powerful, bristling with guns and packed with the mysterious promise of radar. Ray spent long nights poring over technical manuals, learning the language of cathode rays and echo pulses, determined to master the machine that would become his home. His crew was small but tight-knit. Sam Sparky Lee, his radar operator, was a wiry Californian with a knack for electronics and a dry sense of humor. Together, they formed a partnership built on trust and shared risk. The older pilots, veterans of daylight dogfights, looked at the night fighters with a mix of skepticism and respect. "You boys are flying blind," they'd say, shaking their heads. "Hope you know what you're doing out there." Ray felt the weight of those words. He knew he was a lone hunter, the man who would slip into the darkness while others slept, searching for enemies no one else could see. The responsibility was immense, the margin for error razor thin. But Ray took quiet pride in his role. He checked every bolt, every wire, every round of ammunition before each mission. He listened to the doubts, but he let them fuel his resolve. As the missions grew more dangerous and the enemy more desperate, Ray's determination only hardened. He was no longer just a farm boy from Minnesota. He was a night fighter pilot, and he was ready to prove to his crew, his commanders, and himself that he could hunt in the darkness and bring his men home. The Pacific night was a weapon in itself, and the Japanese had learned to wield it with ruthless precision. For months, Allied sailors and airmen had lived in dread of the darkness, knowing that when the sun dipped below the horizon, the enemy's bombers would come. The Mitsubishi G4M Betty was a terror of the South China Sea, a sleek, twin-engine bomber with long, graceful wings and a reputation for speed and range. Its crews called it the Type 1 attack bomber. The Allies called it the Flying Cigar, and learned to fear its silhouette against the moonlit clouds. Japanese night raids were a masterclass in discipline and deception. The bombers flew in tight formation, their navigation lights blacked out, engines throttled low to avoid detection. They used the vastness of the sea and the cover of clouds to slip past picket ships and radar screens. Their approach was silent, their attack sudden. One moment, the fleet would be at rest. The next, bombs would rain down, turning calm water into a cauldron of fire and steel. Ships vanished in the darkness, their crews never seeing the enemy that destroyed them. The psychological impact was devastating. Allied sailors learned to dread the night, to sleep in their clothes, to flinch at every distant drone of engines. Patrols sent out to intercept the bombers often returned empty-handed, their searchlights probing the empty sky. The Japanese crews, for their part, were veterans. Many had survived years of war, their skills honed by countless missions. They trusted in their training, their formation flying in the darkness itself. They believed the night belonged to them, but the Allies were learning. The introduction of radar, first on ships, then in the air, began to shift the balance. The P-61 Black Widow, with its SCR-720 radar, was a new kind of hunter. It could see through fog, cloud, and darkness, tracking enemy bombers by the faintest echo. But radar was still a young science, prone to ghost signals and false alarms. The Japanese adapted, flying lower, changing routes, using the weather to their advantage. The chess game grew more complex with every mission. The Betty bomber itself was a paradox. Fast and agile, it could outrun many Allied fighters, but its lack of armor and self-sealing fuel tanks made it a flying tinderbox. Japanese crews relied on speed, surprise, and the hope that they would not be seen. They knew that if a night fighter found them, their chances of survival were slim. Yet they flew on night after night, driven by duty and desperation. For Captain Ray Johnson, the challenge was clear. He was up against an enemy who knew the darkness better than anyone, who trusted in silence and surprise, who had turned the night into a shield. The P-61 was his answer, a machine built to hunt in the black, to find the bombers before they could strike. But the outcome was far from certain. The Japanese had ruled the night for years, and they would not give up their advantage without a fight. As Johnson prepared for his mission, he knew he was stepping into a deadly game, a contest of nerves, skill, and technology, played out in the shadows above a restless sea. The next hour would test everything he had learned, and the fate of the fleet below would hang on his ability to outthink and outfly the enemy in the darkness. At 11:45 p.m. on July 22, 1945, the airfield on the edge of the South China Sea was a world of shadows and nervous energy. The only light came from the red bulbs in the ready room, where Captain Ray Johnson and Lieutenant Sam Sparky Lee sat with the other night fighter crews, sipping bitter coffee and listening to the low hum of the generator outside. The mission board was crowded with names and targets, but all eyes were on the weather map and the latest intelligence. Japanese bombers were expected to make a run for the fleet before dawn. The tension was thick, broken only by the forced banter of men hiding their nerves. "You ready to bag some Bettys, Ray?" One pilot grinned, slapping Johnson on the back. "Just keep your eyes open and your radar hotter than your coffee." Johnson shot back, managing a smile. Sparky checked his radar manuals one last time, fingers tracing the diagrams of the SCR-720 set, the heart of their Black Widow's hunting power. Outside, the P-61 loomed in the darkness, its black paint swallowing the moonlight. Johnson walked around the aircraft, running his hand along the twin booms, checking the four 20mm cannons in the belly and the 4.50 caliber Brownings in the turret. He inspected the fuel tanks, the oxygen lines, the ammunition belts. Every detail mattered. The ground crew gave a thumbs up, and Johnson climbed into the cockpit, strapping in as Sparky settled behind the radar scope. The engines coughed to life. Twin Pratt & Whitney are 2,800s rumbling with barely contained power. The radio crackled with call signs and last-minute instructions. "Night Stalker, you are clear for takeoff. Good hunting." Johnson taxied to the end of the runway, heart pounding, every sense alive. The P-61 surged forward, wheels lifting into the humid night, the world below shrinking to a patchwork of lights and shadows. As they climbed to altitude, Sparky adjusted the SCR-720 radar, tuning the frequency, watching the green sweep for the first sign of enemy bombers. The set was a marvel, able to pick up a target at 10 miles, track its speed and heading, and guide the pilot into firing position without ever being seen. But it was also temperamental, prone to ghost echoes and sudden static. Johnson trusted Sparky's instincts as much as the machine. The radio was alive with coded chatter. "Night Stalker, this is Control. Japanese formation reported inbound, bearing 110, altitude 8,000 feet. Johnson acknowledged, voice steady despite the knot in his stomach. He checked his instruments, fuel, oil, hydraulics, oxygen, all green. The P-61 was loaded for bear, every gun ready, every system checked and rechecked. The first radar contact came just after 2 a.m. Sparky's voice was tight with excitement. "Contact, Ray." Multiple bogeys, range 9 miles, closing fast. Johnson banked the Black Widow into the hunt, eyes flicking between the instruments and the darkness outside. The anticipation was electric, every nerve on edge. He knew the odds. One night fighter against a formation of bombers, each one capable of turning the sea below into a graveyard. As they closed in, the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Every second mattered. Every blip on the screen was a potential killer. Johnson's mind raced through the possibilities. Attack from below, strike from behind, use the darkness as a shield. The stakes were life and death, not just for him and Sparky, but for the hundreds of sailors sleeping on the ships below. The hunt had begun. The P-61 was a predator in the night, and Johnson was determined to prove that the darkness no longer belonged to the enemy. As the first blips grew larger on the radar, he tightened his grip on the controls, ready to write a new chapter in the history of night combat, one that would leave the Japanese stunned and the world in awe. At 2:23 a.m., the P-61 Black Widow was a shadow among shadows, invisible against the starless sky. Captain Ray Johnson's eyes flicked between the faint glow of his instruments and the darkness outside, every muscle tense as the radar blips crept closer. In the back, Sparky's voice was a low whisper, guiding him in. "Steady, Ray. 2 miles. They don't see us yet." The SCR 720 radar painted a ghostly arc on the screen, a tight cluster of bombers, flying in disciplined formation, unaware that death was closing in. Johnson eased the throttles forward, feeling the surge of power from the twin engines. The P-61's nose dipped, closing the gap. He could almost feel the enemy's confidence, the sense of safety that came with the night. But tonight, the darkness was on his side. Range 1 mile. Visual in 10 seconds, Sparky murmured. Johnson's heart hammered. He flicked the gun switches on, the 4 20mm cannons and 4.50 caliber Brownings ready to unleash hell. The Black Widow's belly was loaded for this moment, enough firepower to tear a bomber apart in seconds. Suddenly, the silhouettes of the Japanese G4M Betty bombers materialized ahead, their engines glowing faintly, navigation lights blacked out. Johnson lined up behind the trailing bomber, closing to within 400 yards. He could see the tail gunner, oblivious, scanning the empty sky behind. Johnson's finger tightened on the trigger. The cannons roared, the P-61 shuddering with the force of the barrage. Tracers stitched the night, slamming into the Betty's fuselage. The bomber erupted in a blossom of flame, fuel tanks igniting, debris spiraling away. For a split second, Johnson saw a figure scrambling inside. Then the plane broke apart, plunging toward the sea in a trail of fire. Splash 1. Sparky shouted, voice triumphant and disbelieving. Johnson banked hard, vanishing back into the darkness before the other bombers could react. The radio crackled with Japanese voices, panic rising as the formation scattered. The enemy, so sure of their safety, was now hunted. Johnson's hands trembled on the controls, adrenaline surging. He could feel the vibration of the guns, the acrid smell of cordite filling the cockpit. The Black Widow was alive, a predator in its element. For the first time, the Japanese bombers knew fear. The night was no longer theirs. As the P-61 disappeared into black, Johnson and Sparky exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of what they'd just accomplished. The first kill was only the beginning. The enemy was on alert now, but so were the hunters. The next hour would test every skill, every nerve, every ounce of courage they possessed. The hunt was far from over, and as the Black Widow circled back for another pass, the legend of the night fighter who made bombers disappear was just beginning to take shape. For the next hour, the South China Sea became a deadly chessboard, and Captain Ray Johnson was the unseen hand moving the pieces. After the first bomber fell, panic rippled through the Japanese formation. The remaining 5 scattered, banking hard, diving for cloud cover, desperate to escape the invisible predator stalking them in the night. But Johnson and Sparky worked as one. Sparky's calm voice guiding Ray through the darkness, the SCR 720 radar painting each fleeing bomber as a glowing echo on the screen. Johnson adjusted his tactics with every pass. He attacked from below, using the P-61 speed to climb into the bombers' blind spots. He cut his engines to idle, gliding in for the kill, then unleashed the Black Widow's cannons in a sudden, blinding burst. Each time, a Betty bomber erupted in fire, tumbling toward the sea before the crew could even return fire. The radio crackled with frantic Japanese transmissions, the enemy's confidence unraveling with every loss. The psychological warfare was as devastating as the guns. The bombers never saw their attacker, only the sudden flash, the roar cannons, and the realization that the night was no longer safe. Johnson's nerves were steel, his hands steady even as sweat stung his eyes and the cockpit filled with the smell of cordite and burning oil. Sparky's voice was a lifeline, calling out ranges, angles, and the next target. One by one, the bombers vanished, then 5, then 6. The last kill was the hardest, the enemy weaving through clouds, firing wildly into the darkness. Johnson waited, patient as a hunter, then struck with a final, perfect burst. The sky fell eerily silent, the only sound the steady hum of the P-61's engines and the distant crackle of burning wreckage below. In 60 minutes, the legend was born. 6 bombers gone, the night reclaimed, and the Japanese left in disbelief, hunted by a single Black Widow they never saw coming. As dawn crept over the South China Sea, Captain Ray Johnson taxied the P-61 back to base, the Black Widow's engines purring in the golden light. Ground crews gathered in disbelief, counting the empty bombers that never returned to harass the fleet. Johnson and Sparky climbed down from the cockpit, faces streaked with sweat and exhaustion, greeted by stunned silence and then a wave of cheers. The story spread like wildfire. One night fighter, 6 bombers gone, all in a single hour. In the debriefing tent, commanders listened in awe as Johnson and Sparky recounted the hunt. The radar logs, the gun camera footage, the radio transcripts, all confirmed the impossible. The P-61, once dismissed by some as an unproven experiment, was now the talk of the fleet. Pilots and mechanics crowded around the Black Widow, running their hands over the scorched gun barrels, asking for every detail of the tactics that had turned the night into a graveyard for the enemy. But for Johnson, the victory was bittersweet. He thought of the men who hadn't made it home, the ships lost in earlier raids, the friends whose luck had run out. The burden of survival weighed heavy, even as medals and commendations were promised. He knew that every mission was a gamble, every success paid for in risk and loss. Still, the legend of the night the bombers disappeared grew with each telling. Johnson's name became a byword for courage and innovation, and the P-61's reputation soared. Yet in quiet moments, Johnson reflected on the true cost of war, the empty bunks, the silent radios, and the knowledge that even the greatest victories come with a price. The night belonged to Black Widow, but the memory belonged to all who fought and fell in the darkness. Long after the smoke cleared and the war's thunder faded, the story of Captain Ray Johnson and his Black Widow lingered in the memories of those who heard it. His actions on that July night became more than just a tale of skill and luck. They became a symbol of what happens when innovation meets courage, and when one person dares to trust new tools and their own instincts, even when others doubt. Johnson's impossible hunt was not just a victory for his crew or his squadron. It was a turning point in the evolution of air combat. The P-61 Black Widow, once an untested experiment, proved that technology, when paired with human ingenuity, could change the very nature of war. Radar, once mysterious and unreliable, became the eyes that pierced the darkness, giving Allied pilots a new way to fight and survive. Johnson's willingness to adapt, to use every advantage, and to strike when the enemy least expected it, set a standard for night fighters across the Pacific and beyond. But the legacy of that night is not just found in tactics or technology. It lives in the quiet heroism of those who stood alone in the dark, who faced the unknown with steady hands and clear eyes. Johnson's story echoes the countless acts of bravery that never made headlines, the mechanics who kept the planes flying, the radar operators who watched the screens, the sailors who waited below, hoping for a dawn without bombs. For every viewer, Johnson's story is a reminder that history is shaped not just by grand strategies or famous names, but by the quiet resolve of individuals who refuse to give in. It's a call to remember the lessons of the past, that innovation often comes from the margins, that courage is sometimes a lonely road, and that the night can be conquered by those willing to hunt in the darkness. As the years pass and the details fade, the legend of the Black Widow and her crew endures, a testament to the power of ingenuity, the cost of victory, and the enduring spirit of those who fought for a world at peace. As we close a chapter on Captain Ray Johnson's legendary night over the South China Sea, take a moment to reflect on the courage, innovation, and quiet heroism that shaped this story and so many others like it. If you or someone in your family has a story of service, survival, or ingenuity from World War II or any chapter of military history, we invite you to share it in the comments below. Your memories and insights help keep these legacies alive, connecting generations and honoring those who stood their ground when it mattered most. If this story moved you, please like the video and subscribe to our channel for more true accounts of forgotten heroes, battlefield innovation, and the untold moments that change history. Every like, comment, and share helps us reach more people and preserve these stories for future generations. Don't let these lessons fade into silence. Be part of a community that values courage, ingenuity, and remembrance. And if you think you've heard it all, stay tuned. Our next episode uncovers another hidden chapter of World War II, a story so unexpected. It will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about the war. Don't miss it.